Today is March 17th, 2024. The conflict in Ukraine continues. Before I get into the latest developments beyond the battlefield, let's take a look at the live map, see what's going on the ground. This is liveuamap.com. It is a pro-Ukrainian map, so please keep that in mind while we look at it. And we can see these icons here that indicates Russian air defenses active inside Russian territory. We see these drone attacks on an oil refinery. We also see Ukrainian air defenses active. And of course, if we look closely to the line of contact, especially outside Donetsk city and Avdeevka, west of Avdeevka, now fully under Russian control, we see these red rifle icons beyond this red Russian-held territory. That indicates Russian forces continue pushing west against Ukrainian forces. Now, what about this attack, this series of attacks on Russia, these drone strikes on these oil refineries and other targets, and this attempted operation to cross the border and attack Russian territory near Belgorod city, and of course launch rockets and artillery shells at Belgorod city itself. So let's start by looking at this CNN article. Drones and shelling hit Russia's Belgorod amid third day of border skirmishes. This was from March 14th, 2024. This went on for a couple of days. Artillery, rocket strikes, drone attacks, and of course attempts to cross the border by these Ukrainian military units. It says the city itself suffered heavy drone strikes and shelling. Of course, this is all civilian areas. These are not military targets that Ukraine is striking at. And this is what they had been doing to the Donbas region from 2014 all the way up until today. It's just a continuation of that, now further into Russian territory. The article also says the strikes came as after Ukraine launched drone strikes on at least 3 oil refineries deep inside Russia, shortly before President Vladimir Putin's anticipated re-election. The trio of depots struck by Ukraine in these cities are among Russia's largest oil refineries, a Ukraine defense source told CNN. The source said the strikes were part of Ukraine's well-planned strategy to decrease Russian economic potential. Nonsense. It didn't do that at all. This is all done for the sake of public relations. And as I'm going to explain, this has nothing to do with disparaging or undermining harmony, social cohesion, unity in Russia. This is about trying to bolster Ukrainian morale as it continues to flag, as this conflict continues to go poorly for Ukraine and its Western sponsors. CNN article talks about who is involved in this attack. The Freedom for Russia Legion, a group of Russian dissidents fighting for Ukraine, which has previously claimed responsibility for incursions into Russia, said it had gained full control of a village in Kursk region. 2 other groups, the Siberian Battalion and the Russian Volunteer Corps. They never explain who the Russian Volunteer Corps is. They are Nazis. They're just plain Nazis. They have Nazi insignia on their uniforms and on their flags. CNN refrains from explaining that. There are other articles that I'm going to show you where they have previously admitted this in the Western media. And they say they aim to liberate Russia from its government, and they were going to continue their operations in Russia. Again, they have done this in the past. It has amounted to exactly nothing. They claim that they have in the past claimed that they've taken villages. Maybe they show up in these villages for a few hours, then they are killed, captured, or sent running for the Ukrainian border. And they have not made any gains in these regions. This is always done to distract the Western public, the Ukrainian public, from catastrophic losses Ukraine has now consistently suffered. Let's take a look at this article right here. This is from Vice. Very pro-Western publication, but even they admit anti-Putin militias celebrating attacks on Russia are filled with neo-Nazis. And here they are. They're talking about the Russian Volunteer Corps It includes a guy arrested for spreading the Christchurch Shooters Manifesto and the founder of a neo-Nazi death metal festival. Par for the course for the most hardcore, most dedicated Ukrainian military organizations. They are Nazis. They always have been. The Western media used to report on this from 2014 all the way up until 2022. And now, as you can see, as CNN has done, they are covering this up. What is the point of these militant groups, armed, equipped, and working on behalf of Kiev and its Western backers? What is the point of this? What were they trying to achieve? Here's an article from France 24. Pro-Ukrainian armed groups launch incursion into Russia. Pro-Ukrainian militias staged a brazen cross-border attack on Russia hours after Kiev launched one of its largest drone attacks since the start of the war. All of this is being timed for the Russian elections. They're trying desperately to disrupt the Russian elections, which has categorically failed. They have failed to disrupt the elections. This is what the France 24 article says. A spokesperson for the political wing of the Freedom of Russia Legion told AFP the attack was timed to coincide with Russia's March 15 to 17 presidential elections. So there you go. They're trying to stage this, overshadow the elections. Is it working? Is it making Russians upset? Is it undermining their faith in Moscow? No, it is not. The Western media even admits this. This is from the Washington Post. In Belgorod, Russian city hit hardest by war, Putin is still running strong. This is from March 15th. As polling stations opened across Russia for a 3-day presidential election that Vladimir Putin is certain to win, a volley of Ukrainian missiles crashed into the western city of Belgorod, damaging apartment buildings and injuring at least 2 people as thousands of residents scrambled yet again for shelter. For most Russian voters, Putin's 2-year-old war in Ukraine remains largely unseen except on state-controlled television or social media. But Belgorod, a regional capital near the Ukrainian border, feels the war firsthand as it faces near daily attacks. For 4 days this week, the city's air defenses struggled to intercept barrages of rockets and explosive drones, while east and south of Belgorod, the Russian army battled anti-Kremlin militias. They're Ukrainian military forces. That's who they are. And they're based in Ukraine. So the idea that these are Russians fighting against the Russian military is absurd. Which mounted assaults along the border, aiming to portray Putin as unable to protect his country as he prepares to claim a 5th term in office. But there is little sign that the effort is succeeding, and for many residents, such attacks only deepen their support for Putin and drive home the Kremlin's false narrative that Russians are the victims in the war, not its perpetrators. But in reality, yes, Russia is the victim. They reluctantly launched the special military operation. This was after decades of NATO expanding up to and along Russia's borders, overthrowing governments friendly to Russia, installing client regimes that eagerly militarized their country, and aimed it at Russia, including Georgia from 2003 to 2008, when even the EU admits Georgian forces attacked Russian forces, and then they were doing this whole process again on a much larger scale in Ukraine from 2014 onward. This is what Russia was reacting to. And remember, all during that same time, NATO was expanding across Eastern Europe up to Russia's borders. They were also illegally invading countries around the globe, overthrowing governments, destroying entire nations, including allies of Russia. This is what Russia was responding to. This was not some unprovoked attack out of the blue by Russia. They were responding to decades and decades of NATO expansion and military aggression. This isn't affecting the Russian population. Who are these public relations stunts meant to affect? And I just want to show you this other older article that I've referenced many times before. This is from August 2023. Kiev's drone strikes on Moscow. I mean, Kremlin's war can't be ignored by Russians. But if you actually read the whole article, they admit at the end of the article that yes, Russians are actually completely ignoring these drone strikes. They don't care. It's not affecting them. The few people who do notice them, it only galvanizes them to support Moscow even more. So what's left is the Ukrainian public. They just watched Ukrainian forces be driven out of one of the most heavily fortified positions the Ukrainians occupied along the line of contact in Avdeevka. They watched Ukrainian forces be decimated. They're falling back. We saw all of this propaganda about Ukraine shooting all of these Russian warplanes out of the sky, and yet these glide bombs continue striking Ukrainian positions all along the line of contact, continuously driving the Ukrainians back. We're watching the Western media collectively admit that Ukraine is suffering an arms and ammunition shortage, as well as a trained manpower shortage, all of which cannot be remedied. There is no solution to this problem, which only continues to grow. Why are they conducting these attacks into Russia then? This is to temporarily bolster morale amongst the Ukrainian population, amongst the pro-Ukrainian circles that you see around the globe, shrinking, circles that are shrinking, groups of people who still believe Ukraine can win this conflict, essentially. That is who these attacks are meant to manipulate and provide false hope to. If you go on to, say, X or on YouTube and you look at pro-Ukrainian commentators, they do certainly seize on these type of operations and use it to generate false hope that somehow the tide is turning in Ukraine's favor, when the operations are rapidly crushed and Ukraine ends up suffering even more losses in terms of manpower, equipment, and ammunition that they cannot spare. They are not going to win this conflict through these type of cross-border operations. They're not going to win this conflict utilizing some sort of wonder weapon. The only way they could possibly win this conflict is if they were able to come up with more arms and ammunition to match or exceed Russian firepower. That simply is not going to happen. But I do want to point out this from Reuters. This is actually from March 13th, 2024. U.S. to send new weapons package worth $300 million for Ukraine. Now, I have not seen the Department of Defense list of what they are sending, but I'll just let you know what Reuters said about this. U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan said the funding was coming from unanticipated cost savings from Pentagon contracts and would be used for artillery rounds and munitions for high mobility artillery rocket system HIMARS. This ammunition will keep Ukraine's guns firing for a period, but only a short period, Sullivan told reporters, adding it may only be helpful to Ukraine for a couple of weeks. And that is the whole problem. Even if the $60 billion were passed by U.S. Congress, there's not enough ammunition to send Ukraine. As a matter of fact, pretending that they accidentally found this money and sending what little ammunition they can scrape together in packages like this is much better than passing the $60 billion bill and then revealing to the world that despite having this huge sum of money, you simply don't have any ammunition to buy with the money. I think that would be much worse for the U.S. at this point. I've talked about this for 2 years now, how the U.S. simply does not make enough artillery shells. They don't make enough guided rockets for HIMARS. They don't make enough munitions, period, for any of the systems that they've sent to Ukraine. And this whole problem cannot be resolved because it takes years to expand production to the levels required by Ukrainian troops on the line of contact. Before I get into Western admissions to just how much more ammunition Russia is producing than the whole West combined, I just want to show you another example of posturing, this attempt to make it look like the West still has more they can do to support Ukraine, when in reality they are out of options. This is from The Guardian. This is from March 15th. German, French, and Polish leaders make joint show of unity over Ukraine. Military powers agree to step up purchases of ammunition for Kiev in effort to dampen mutual tensions over Russia stance. And they're talking about France, President Macron talking about sending French troops to Ukraine, Germany, at least supposedly resisting sending any Western troops to Ukraine. And now they've had this meeting where they all agreed to buy more weapons, more ammunition for Ukraine, but buy it from where? And they're talking about the same plan that I talked about in a previous update. The Czech president talking about buying up whatever 155 millimeter artillery rounds exist in stockpiles around the world outside of Europe. And I said that they had put the number at 800,000 artillery rounds of all calibers, not just 155 millimeter. But I said in a previous update that even if all 800,000 rounds were 155 millimeter rounds, and every single one of those rounds was bought and sent to Ukraine, it would only last Ukraine 4 months. That is the scale of the problem Ukraine and its Western sponsors have. They cannot solve this. They need new factories churning out ammunition at rates they simply are not anywhere near at the moment, and won't be for years to come. Rates of production that Russia has already reached and will continue to exceed. So here's from CNN, exclusive. Russia producing 3 times more artillery shells than US and Europe for Ukraine. How is this an exclusive? We've known about this for months, if not longer. CNN says Russia appears on track to produce nearly 3 times more artillery munitions than the US and Europe, a key advantage ahead of what is expected to be another Russian offensive in Ukraine later this year. Russia is producing about 250,000 artillery munitions per month, or about 3 million a year, according to NATO intelligence estimates of Russian defense production shared with CNN, as well as sources familiar with Western efforts to arm Ukraine. Collectively, the US and Europe have the capacity to generate only about 1.2 million munitions annually to send to Kiev, a senior European intelligence official told CNN. The US military set a goal to produce 100,000 rounds of artillery a month by the end of 2025, less than half of the Russian monthly output right now, not in 2025. And even that number is now out of reach, with $60 billion in Ukraine funding stalled in Congress, a senior army official told reporters last week. But they were talking about 100,000 rounds per month by the end of 2025. Even if that was achievable, even if we weren't talking about this $60 billion in aid, that still falls far short of what Russia is making just right now, saying nothing of what they will be making by 2025, the end of 2025. So as you can see, that's $60 billion in aid being held up. That is just an excuse the US is hiding behind so that they don't have to admit to the world they simply are not capable of arming Ukraine sufficiently to match or exceed Russian firepower. That's all that this actually is. And I just want to explain why, when CNN says this is an exclusive, somehow this is an exclusive March 11th, 2024, we all remember articles like this from the New York Times. This was from September 2023. Russia overcomes sanctions to expand missile production, officials say. They talk about missile production, artillery production, tank production. It says Russia has managed to overcome sanctions and export controls imposed by the West to expand its missile production beyond pre-war levels, according to the US, European, and Ukrainian officials, leaving Ukraine especially vulnerable to intensified attacks in the coming months. And we've seen the results of that. Before the war, one senior Western defense official said Russia could make 100 tanks a year. Now they are producing 200. Western officials also believe Russia is on track to manufacture 2 million artillery shells a year, double the amount Western intelligence services had initially estimated Russia could manufacture before the war. As a result of the push, Russia is now producing more ammunition than the United States and Europe overall. It's estimated that Russia's current ammunition production is 7 times greater than that of the West. And I assume that they mean all ammunition of all kinds is 7 times greater than the West. In terms of artillery shells specifically, at least 3 times greater than the West, as CNN has now revealed. So this does not sound sustainable. And as I've pointed out for the last 2 years, this is not sustainable. It has been evident for a very long time. These politicians, analysts, commentators, they're ignoring this reality for their own political convenience, and they're doing it at the expense of the Ukrainian people. And we could see the impact this is having along the line of contact, Ukrainians being pressed into service, sent without proper training, without proper weapons, without a proper supply, a sufficient supply of ammunition. They're being sent to the front line to die because the West is too stubborn to admit that this was a bad idea and that they are losing. And I don't think that they really care. I think they possibly have been aware of this all along. As they themselves have said, this is about fighting Russia to the last Ukrainian. It's not about beating Russia. It's about raising the cost of victory for Russia as high as possible. That's what this is about, and that's why they will try to continue this for as long as possible. That's why they're sending these cross-border raids into Russia to try to just keep this going for as long as possible, to raise the cost of victory for Russia as high as possible. This conflict should never have happened in the first place. We remember, before 2014, Ukraine had full control over the Donbas. They had a semi-autonomous Crimea within their borders. They were dealing with Russia. They were dealing with the West. They had the best of both worlds, and they were neutral, and they enjoyed their neutrality. And it was the United States openly overthrowing their elected government in 2014, installing a client regime of their choosing in its place, militarizing Ukraine, NATOizing Ukraine, creating a national security threat to Russia right on its borders, as a 2019 Rand Corporation paper titled Extending Russia even admitted. And they forced Russia to react. I guess the US assumed Russia would not want to pay the cost, but they are paying the cost, and they are winning this conflict. They have called the West bluff, and now we can see the West attempting to continue bluffing Russia. If Russia continues to win, we'll send Western troops into Ukraine. I don't think Russia is worried about that. It will be, again, at the peril of the people in Europe, the people in the United States, who are going to be forced to pay the cost of this conflict for the people making these very poor policy decisions on their behalf. I think they understand that if they cannot assert themselves over Russia in Ukraine, they're not going to be able to assert themselves over China in the Asia-Pacific region. They shouldn't be attempting to do this in either Eastern Europe or in Asia-Pacific. This is all about the West desperately trying to maintain hegemony over the entire globe. This is an irrational policy to begin with, which is why everything they have tried to build on top of it has been equally irrational, unsustainable, and is now delivering defeat to them successively. I will continue to keep an eye on this conflict. Until then, if you thought this video was useful, please like and share. Think about subscribing to my channel. It's free to do. It helps the channel grow. Check the video description below for other places you can find and follow my work. Check the video description below for all of the links that I've referenced in this video, as well as for ways you can help support my work. I do not monetize my YouTube channel or any of my social media platforms. If ads pop up, feel free to skip past them. They're not helping me out at all. If you do want to help support my work, please do so through Buy Me a Coffee and through Patreon. To everyone who has been helping out, whether it's once a month, one-time donations, or even if you have no money to spare and you're just helping share my work with others, that is all greatly appreciated. That is what makes this work possible. So thank you. And as always, thank you for watching.